Thanks again, everybody, for being here this morning. The title of this morning's message is The Secret Self. So I figured I'd begin with a couple of confessions. The first confession I'll share is that to me, the best treat is the one that I'm able to have without anyone else knowing about it. I like sneaking into that cupboard and having a cookie, cleaning up the crumbs, sitting down, and no one's the wiser. Nobody knows about it. It tastes so much better that way. Another secret is I love our church songs, and sometimes when I'm down, I like to sing them, but sometimes when I'm really down, I just change the lyrics to go with my mood. So sometimes when I'm having a bad day, instead of the I Am So Blessed, which is our offering song, I do something that goes like this. I am so stressed, I am so stressed, I am so ungrateful for all of this mess. You can make them alone. I don't know if anyone else out here has any confessions. I could just get rid of the sermon for the day and we have a very entertaining hour together, as long as we remember the statute of limitations. So I have a secret self that is also full of contradictions. It somehow both thinks I know everything and is afraid that it knows nothing at the same time. Thinks I'm the greatest and super good looking, and thinks I'm the worst and ugliest dirt at the same time. Thinks I'm capable of anything and doesn't want to leave the house to do anything. Anyone else have a self similar? If not, I'm a little embarrassed. Is it out there? So I think we all have kind of a secret self that's built of our idiosyncrasies and neuroses, and hopefully there's some parts of it that could be even adorable at times, but we definitely want to be aware of it in our lives. I also believe that I have another secret self, and this is a secret self I'm pretty sure everybody has. This is a secret self that is grounded in divine wisdom. A secret self that is grounded in divine love, that is connected to a sacred source at all times, whether the conscious self is aware of it or not. Do you have that secret self too? Yeah, all right. Because I think it exists, and spiritual teachers for millennia have spoken to this idea. They call it the mystical or mysterious truth within each one of us. Or they refer to it as the secret place of the Most High. And I know in my life, what I would like is for that inner truth to not be such a mystery. I would like it to be the most obvious place of the Most High within each of us, because I can begin to think of how different my life would be at different times, and perhaps you can too, if you were truly aware of that sacred and precious truth of your being. So I wonder how I can better understand this secret self. Not just the neurotic, I almost said naughty. I guess we could do not just the naughty, neurotic. I think they call it a Freudian slip, don't they? How to balance that stuff, but also to better nurture this sacred self. This secret self that's always connected so I can bring it into life. But it's challenging. It's like, how do I bring into balance the battle, between that part of me that thinks it knows but doesn't, and that part of me that does know that I don't know, that I'm ignorant of? It's challenging to find that balance, to create the boundaries and the self-knowledge that can help me live authentically and fully self-aware, to fully embody that old ancient Greek axiom of know thyself. Know thyself. Do you know yourself? I don't think there's any other way to learn to live in balance and in harmony unless we do. Socrates, who is the inspiration for many of our talks this month, perhaps said it best when he said that the unexamined life is not worth living. I think there's a lot of truth to it. I would go even so far to say that the unexamined life isn't much of a life at all. And that the individual who doesn't or denies learning about themselves maybe isn't much of an individual either. That in order to truly live in a way where we're aware of the sacred in ourselves, we have to take that time to study ourselves, not judge ourselves, not run over ourselves with a fine-tooth comb, but to really listen and open ourselves to really understanding who we are so that we can be it with clarity in the world. The legend of Socrates is kind of interesting. It is said that one day someone went to an oracle in ancient Greece and asked the oracle, who is the wisest person in all of the land? Kind of a mirror on the wall kind of thing. And the oracle said that it was Socrates. And when Socrates heard this, he couldn't believe it because, Socrates, I'm as dumb as a doornail. I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. And he saw, if I'm the wisest person in the world, well, I better find out what wisdom is. So I'm going to see if I can find out who is wise in this world. And Socrates went and he spoke to the poets, and he liked their poems, and he asked them what wisdom was, and they were sure they knew what it was. But he disagreed. He didn't think that they knew what it was, and he told them so. So it ticked off the poets, and he left. And then he went and he started asking the sophists what wisdom was. This is the teachers of the time. And they said, yeah, we know what wisdom is. It's A, B, and C. And Socrates, he didn't agree with this, and he let them know, and this ticked the sophists off. So he went and he talked to the politicians, and he found for sure that they didn't know what wisdom was at all. And he let them know, and it ticked them off, and he found himself on his own, and then he realized that perhaps it is true that I am the wisest of men because I have the courage to admit that I do not know. And because I don't know, therefore I am wise. He is said to have said, because Socrates didn't write anything down, it's just kind of like Jesus, we're just getting reports about him. He is said to have said, true wisdom comes to each of us when we realize how little we understand about life, ourselves, and the world around us. So that's not a statement that tells us to play dumb, but tells us to come into ourselves, being willing to understand ourselves from a place of listening. For Socrates, it was all about questioning. Socrates is not someone who had a lot of answers to questions. He went around asking people questions and knew that wisdom came that way. And it was a way that was troubling for people. Imagine yourself being in the grocery store tomorrow and some dude with a long white beard comes up to you and asks you, what do you value most in life? What is the most sacred and important thing to you? And you might say some pizza rolls because you're on aisle 4 or whatever, trying to get your groceries and get out of there. But maybe, suppose you do answer him and you say love, or family, or peace, or prosperity. And suppose this man doesn't just nod his head and just say, oh, that's great, but he says, well, what is love anyway? What is justice? What is peace? And suppose you give him an answer, and suppose that he finds a little hole in your logic, so he starts to question you. Would you find this moment profound, or would you want to hit him with frozen peas? Wouldn't you want to get out of there? But that's what Socrates did in a way of teaching us how to think, because what happens is we get so frustrated sometimes when we're unable to articulate what is most important to us, because it points out to us that perhaps we don't really know or truly understand what is most valuable and important to us. And in that, there can be a problem. Socrates was wise enough to know you can't always put things into words, but we can ask ourselves, what do I value? What matters to me? What is the true nature of my own soul? And try to understand it and practice it in the world, denying the other axiom of ignorance is bliss, right? To really know ourselves and show up in a profound way. So in order to unveil our secret self, we have to pay attention to ourselves, not just the holy part, but all the idiosyncrasies as well, to find some sort of balance. There's a new book out, thank you, Barbara, for giving it to me, by the musician Paul Williams and Tracy Jackson. It's called Gratitude and Trust, 6 affirmations that will change your life. And it's an interesting book because Paul Williams comes from 12-step programs, and they've written this book in a way that you can apply the 12-step principles to your everyday life. So it's kind of an interesting take on spirituality and the 12 steps. But they share with us 6 daily affirmations or rules to live by. The first, something needs to change, and it's probably me. 2, I don't know how to do this, but something inside me does. Interesting. 3, I will learn from my mistakes and not defend them. Very hard for me to do. 4, I will make right the wrongs I've done whenever possible. 5, I will examine my behavior on a daily basis. Know thyself. 6, I will live in love and service, gratitude and trust. I love that one. No matter what, live in service, live in gratitude, live in trust. But I want to go back to that second one briefly. Even though I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, something in me knows. It sounds like a contradiction, but do you buy that? Is there some truth to that? To know that even when we're entering something knowing we don't know, we can have trust that there is indeed an intuition, an inner wisdom. Not that we should try to give it its own language or make up what we want it to say, but if we stay open and listen to it, it can guide us with great clarity. So I think there's a great rule here about how to bring into balance our true self so we can live it more authentically and harmoniously without getting caught up in the BS of ourselves that's so easy to come about sometimes. I had a good female friend who shared with me that there was a new person that started working at her job and she couldn't stand the guy. He just really drove her crazy. He pushed every button that she had. And she didn't like the way that he talked, and she didn't like the way that he walked, and she didn't like most anything that he did. And 2 years later, you know what she did? She married that man. You know, and talking to her about why was this? Because immediately something in her inner self was drawn to him. He really was a great guy, but even though that inner part of her was saying yes, all of that other self was going into defense mechanism mode and saying no, 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 no. There was this inner battle going on. This is probably what Chris Christie went through before he endorsed Donald Trump. But that can happen to any of us. You know, the heart says yes and the mind says no, but there's an even deeper aspect of it as well. When we can bring that awareness into who we really are, we can listen to where our intuition is guiding us. You know, I'm really grateful to be getting married in November to someone I've known since I was about 16 years old. And it's really great to be marrying someone that you have a great story with, but you also stop and say, well, how come you didn't figure this out a little sooner? Right? And I don't know all the answers to that, but looking back, one interesting thing that I always knew, no matter where I was in state of what the relationship could become, is that whenever she called or sent a message, there was always something in me that just really knew to pick up that phone. Always knew to write that email back as soon as possible. You know, I didn't know, but something in me knew, you know, to invest that yes, to nurture that connection. And I think we do that in a lot of different areas, and perhaps you can think of some areas in your life where something developed for you that was really grand and wonderful, and part of you didn't know, but part of you knew as well. And we can each nurture those opportunities in our lives. Again, it comes down to that axiom of know thyself. Know thyself. And do you know yourself? Do you? No. I haven't got a clue. I like the shaking heads out there. Well, good. Well, then maybe that means that you do. You know, or as Alan Watts used to say, I know the me that knows that I'm me, but who I want to know is the me that knows that I know that I'm me. It can get very slippery in there. But self-knowledge isn't an answer. It's a way of being, right? It's a way of thinking. And I think it was really Socrates and Jesus that really helped us to understand this axiom. An interesting thing historically is that know thyself is something that the Greeks believed was a message from the gods. It was a message from the gods that was actually a negative statement to us human beings. See, the gods didn't really like human beings because the gods knew that within man was deep truth, deep wisdom. We shared a couple weeks ago the story of the gods hiding the truth within man because that would be the last place he'd ever look for it. So there's always this story because the gods didn't want man to know his true nature. So they would say, know thyself. Nothing in excess. Know thy limits. Do not grow. Stay in your role. We see this expressed in Greek mythology and stories of Zeus. We even can find it in our Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. You know, a lot of people teach that Adam and Eve are cast out of the Garden of Eden because they eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but that's not necessarily true. By eating that fruit, the consequences is that they become responsible for their own lives, and because they've eaten that, the reason God cast them out of the garden is because he's afraid that they're going to eat from the tree of immortality that's going to give them eternal life. He's afraid they will become God-like. A little later in the book of Genesis, all humanity speaks one tongue, and everything's going great. They're building these great towers, and God gets afraid. He says, no, pretty soon they're just going to be like me. And so he takes everybody, and he splits them up, and so they all speak different languages. Wouldn't that be great if we lived from that spiritual myth in our life, that we're all from the same source coming back together to learn one language again, to be one again? Now, all this in a little bit sounds absurd, because why would God do all these things? And I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is I often run into a part of myself within myself that seems to want to keep me away from knowing the truth of who I am, that seems sometimes to want to limit that growth, that wants me to know thyself in a more limited way. It's that part of me that's afraid. It's that part of me that's nervous about stepping into that greater power. And maybe you have that aspect of yourself too. For me, through Socrates and Jesus, who again are very similar people, we have a new method of knowing thyself. You know, if Socrates teaches us how to think, Jesus teaches us how to love. He's the first one that comes from this idea that God isn't afraid. God isn't someone to have to be jealous, but God is someone who loves you, who cares about you, who unconditionally has regard for you. This is an amazing message, and Socrates tells us to ask questions and things, and then for millennia we've been twisting the message up, right? Not getting it right, but it doesn't mean the message isn't there. To live in love, to live with a healthy questioning and an openness for wisdom. And if we can do those two things, we can live in greater knowing of ourselves. Socrates is very similar to Jesus. You know, Socrates didn't write anything down, and Jesus didn't write anything down, so we just have messages from their followers. That neither of them took money for what they did. They were just fully who they are. And both are put on trial and killed for what they taught. And Socrates is put on trial in Athens. It's a little bit of a bigger trial because in Athens, a jury there has 500 people. Could you imagine that for one of our trials today? Yeah, that's a lot of C-SPAN action going on. But there's 500 people on the jury, and what happens is all these poets and politicians and sophists who Socrates has ticked off, they're finally going to get him. And so there's trumped up charges, and Socrates is so great that he defeats each one, but the jury is filled with these people, so they still narrowly convict him. And what they want Socrates to do is to say, please don't kill me. I'm sorry. That's what they want him to do. Because when you're convicted in Athens, as opposed to death, you can propose a different type of sentence. So Socrates says, please don't kill me, but what my consequence should be is you should put me in the finest mansion in town and give me free drinks and free food for life. So he challenges them, and unfortunately they go with their fear and they convict him, and Socrates has to die. He says these words. He says, I would rather die having spoken in my manner than speak in your manner and live. For neither in war nor yet in law ought any man use every way of escaping death. For often in battle there is no doubt that if a man will throw away his arms and fall on his knees before his pursuers, he may escape death, if a man is willing to say or do anything. The difficulty, my friend, is not in avoiding death, but in avoiding unrighteousness, for that runs deeper than death. And I share that with you, not to invite you all to be martyrs, but to recognize those virtues and values that you wouldn't hesitate to die for. To recognize those virtues and values that so define who you are that you would never give up on them, because you know they're much of who you are. They're more who you are than your own name, more who you are than your own body. They're the very name and essence of your soul, and you would never sacrifice them. That's what I think Socrates is encouraging us to do, and that's something that will truly allow us not just to know thyself, but to be thyself. And that's what I know I want in my life. That's what I want for each of you in your life, to feel that you live each day not hack yourself, not with the volume down, but with things on full blast, fully stepping into that being, fully stepping into your becoming, knowing that the process in a sense never ends, but there is so much in your creativity, in your ongoing becoming. Socrates is said to have said something else quite wise. There is only one good, knowledge, and only one evil, ignorance. One more time. There is only one good, knowledge, and only one evil, ignorance. In our teaching here, we teach that evil is a valid experience that people have in the world, but it's not a thing in itself. And so this is why Socrates' words should enamor us religious scientists, because the statement is, if we know ourselves and bring that awareness, even if we're going into dark places, there's only good is going to come out of that. But if we stay in ignorance, if we do not bring the light of awareness into ourselves or to those areas where we see it taking place, then this evil emerges. Then this confusion emerges. Then these misdeeds emerge. We can't be responsible for anyone else around us all the time, but we can take responsibility for our own mind, our own heart, our own choices and way of being in the world. So I encourage us, even if it's scary at times, to not hesitate to know yourself, to make the secrets of yourself a little less secret and a little bit more aware. Again, this isn't a process that we engage in through self-judgment or berating or blame or trying to change the past. It's something that we engage in with acceptance, with love, with openness, and perhaps most importantly, a willingness to bring the clarity of what we discover into our lives with greater awareness, greater heart, greater courage, and greater acceptance of that most deep down truth of who each one of us are. So thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for being here. Thank you. And let's